There is no truth, there's only power.
Yeah.
And of course, the world's foremost postmodernist theorist is Donald Trump. The scientific community sometimes can get locked onto beliefs that are later shown to be false. So that's why it's always absolutely indispensable to have free speech. That speech can't be punished, it can't be censored. There's a rise of cancel culture on the right in the wake of the shooting of Charlie Kirk. If you dissent from the idea that he was a kind of saint of civil discourse, if you say anything negative about him, in many cases people have been fired, people have been mobbed on social media, they've been subject to death threats.
Welcome to Thinkers on Times Radio. This is season 2. My name is Stig Abell. As you know, we try and do a bit of nuance, a bit of debate, a bit of big thinking on big ideas. And I'm joined today by a really great man, a really great thinker, someone who I know you'll be interested in, Steven Pinker. He's written a great book, When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows. It's about common knowledge. What does common knowledge mean and how does it relate to things like cancel culture, hypocrisy, the way we try and relate to the world? And I'm delighted to say Steven joins us now.
Thank you so much.
Steven, lovely to see you. Common knowledge is a kind of a cliche when it's used very casually, and you've done the opposite of that. You've taken a phrase and you've used it as a springboard for a whole series of important thoughts. But should we start at the beginning? What do you mean by common knowledge and why does it matter?
Yeah, it is a specialized meaning of the term from philosophy and game theory and economics. And it refers to the state in which I know something, you know something, I know that you know it, you know that I know it, I know that you know that I know it, and so on ad infinitum. So it's not just something that is widely known, it has to be known that it is known. Okay. And that makes a difference.
And it makes a difference because by that act of knowing, we are collaborating at some level, either knowingly, either kind of deliberately or not deliberately.
Yes, we're coordinating. That is, we are making choices that help us both as long as we make the same choice. If you drive on the left or drive on the right, you're not doing something that's inherently rational for its own sake. Across the ocean, we drive on the right. Yeah. Works just fine. As long as everyone drives on the same side and knows that everyone else knows that you have to drive on the right side or the left side. Likewise, recognizing paper currency. I accept a piece of paper in exchange for something of value because I know that other people will accept it, which they only do because they know that still other people will accept it. The words of a language. I use the word rose to refer to a rose, even though by any other name it would smell just as sweet. Why? Because I just expect that the entire community of English speakers know that that's the way you refer to it, and it has no meaning other than the fact that everyone knows that it has that meaning. So these are some large-scale phenomena that depend on a kind of tacit common knowledge. That is, you don't have to think through, well, everyone knows that the word for rose is rose, but that's the logic behind it. But even in our small-scale interactions where we have to coordinate, they depend on common knowledge. Two people wanting to rendezvous. It's not enough to know that my wife likes to go to a bookstore, so I'll find her there, because she might think, well, Steve likes to go to a camera store, so I'll find him there. Then she might think, well, Steve knows that I'd like to go to a bookstore, so I'll stay here after all. Then she says, oh, no, but then he knows that I know that he likes to go to the camera store, so I better head there. I'm going through the same cognitive gymnastics, and nothing short of each one knowing that the other knows can get us in the same place.
Unless you're explicit and you cut through that by saying we are going to meet at that at 8 o'clock.
So that's what language can do. Yeah. Direct speech, blurting something out, stipulating it in so many words, generates common knowledge. That's the main reason we have language. That's why we evolved it.
People watching this and listening to this might be thinking of the prisoner's dilemma when you talk about this, which is a slightly different version of it, because in general life, driving on the left, it's an accepted practice. It's common knowledge really without any win and loss aspect to it. It's something that we all accept as part of being a society. The same is true of how words have their meaning. There comes to a point where there's just a general agreement. How does something like the prisoner's dilemma illustrate what you're saying about common knowledge?
So I do discuss the prisoner's dilemma as actually an illustration of what common knowledge is not. Yeah. So prisoner's dilemma, I mean, what makes it relevant is that it comes out of game theory being the branch of mathematics that deals with what is the optimal course of action when the outcome depends on the other guy's course of action. And so it's a little bit mind bending, but also fascinating. Prisoner's Dilemma being one of the paradoxical cases where if everyone acts in their own interest, they end up worse off. But there's what makes a prisoner's dilemma a tragedy is that there's only one equilibrium that inevitably the two parties end up in. It's a bad one. But the kind of games that are relevant to common knowledge are sometimes called coordination games. And they have a different logic because they're often two ways of doing things, each one of which work, but they only work if both of you are on the same page.
Yeah.
So the classic example has an unfortunate name of the Battle of the Sexes. That's from the 50s when people were very happy to talk about gender stereotypes without blushing. But this is a case of, say, a couple. They enjoy spending time together. He has a slight preference for, going out and seeing ice hockey. I'll use a Canadian example.
Well
being
done, yeah.
Canadian.
We can understand that. It's fine.
Okay.
Common knowledge extends just about to ice hockey. Not much beyond that, but I think ice hockey is just about our limits here.
And let's say, to continue the gender stereotype, she'd prefer to be at the opera.
Yep.
And so there are two equilibria. They both go to the opera. They enjoy each other's company. They both go to the hockey game. Again, they enjoy each other's company. If one's at the opera, the other's at the hockey game, that's an outcome they want to avoid because they want to be together. But the question is, which of those two equilibria, hockey or opera, do they end up in?
Yeah.
And again, they have to have common knowledge of which of the two. Now, they may resolve it by some convention, and all of our conventions are matters of common knowledge. They may have a convention, chivalry, ladies first. So
Yeah.
she gets her pick. Or patriarchy, they go where he demands they go. Or they might flip a coin. They might take turns.
Yeah,
These
fairness. There might be
that's another
yeah.
equilibrium. And the reason that these coordination dilemmas they sometimes even annoy game theorists, the mathematicians, because there is no one solution that is determined by the payoffs. The solution depends on human quirks, caprice, arbitrary cultural traditions, stuff that game theorists don't like to think about, all this messy human stuff. But it turns out the messy human stuff is what determines the solution to this mathematical problem.
In some ways, you're talking about good faith here. I'm struck by the book, and what you're saying is that when we think about the modern world, we're talking about a loss of good faith very often in how we talk to one another, how we willingly understand one another. So common knowledge at its best is when people in good faith share information and use it to collaborate in a way to get a positive end for everybody.
It often involves good faith, but in some of these dilemmas, it's just in everyone's interest to do it the same way. They don't have to worry about betrayal or guilt or trust in the way that the prisoners in the prisoner's dilemma do. Or at least the repeated prisoner's dilemma, because, say, in the case of driving on the right, it's just in everyone's interest to do it, that you don't have to take a leap of faith. As soon as you know that other people are going to drive on the left, you drive on the left.
But when we talk about ideas, it's not always in everyone's interest for the truth to be known.
Well, that is certainly true, right? And in fact, the truth, when it comes to issues beyond our immediate experience. Do you have food in the fridge? Is there petrol in the car? Are the kids dressed and ready to go to school? Where it's in everyone's interest to know the truth, to align yourself with the truth. When it comes to things like why do bad things happen to good people? What are the causes of disease, of economic depressions and
Is
affluence?
vaccination a good thing?
It's vaccination. Things that you can't see with your own eyes. Even though scientists will say, well, there is a way of finding out the truth.
Well, indeed.
The scientific method. Journalists will say, well, we can get to the bottom of this. Historians will say, well, let's go to the record and see what really did happen. That's very unintuitive. I think for most of human history, big questions just didn't have answers. There's no way to find out.
Yeah.
And so they were matters of self-expression. They were matters of mythology, matter of tribal solidarity and loyalty. And still to this day, I think that stays with people, that what you believe is a sign of what kind of a person you are. It's a very different mindset than what you believe should be a reflection of what's true.
And has that become more profoundly difficult in the last 20 years? I was thinking about the arrival of postmodernism, when people basically said, we're not only just going to accept an authority, we're going to look behind the authority. We're going to get to the point where we start challenging ideas of what makes an authority, which is quite a healthy intellectual pursuit. Once you remove the concept of authority from the equation, you are left with, here's something I believe rather than here's something I believe can be proved definitively in either direction.
Yes, it's good to question authority if it is the exercise of power.
Yeah.
That has extended to questioning expertise, where there actually is some legitimate claim to authority about the truth based on the methods that they use. And yes, the postmodernist idea is that I think it's actually quite consistent with human nature. Namely, there is no truth, there's only power.
Yeah.
And of course, the world's foremost postmodernist theorist is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, I don't think he's taken courses in French literary theory.
No, he probably wouldn't recognise it, but yes.
he's independently discovered it.
And what does that mean in practice? Because I think that's what's getting to the heart of this, because that I mentioned vaccination, it's probably quite a good example, that there is a whole bunch of science that you can investigate, you can challenge the authority, you can test the science, you can prod the scientists, you don't have to believe what they say because they're scientists, but there is a body of independently verifiable information at stake. Or you can assert that world is just inherently corrupt and my sort of person doesn't agree with it, and therefore I'm going to side with my sort of person, and the common knowledge I believe that we share is more important than a whole bunch of facts that sit over here, the exercise of power that you're talking about.
Indeed, and I think that's a tendency. I discuss it in my previous book, Rationality, where I had to deal with the puzzle that obviously our species is capable of spectacular feats of rationality. We invented vaccines, the computer, we got to the moon, figured out DNA. On the other hand, there are so many people who are willing to believe in quack cures, conspiracy theories, paranormal woo-woo, magical flim-flam. How can we reconcile that this can coexist in the same species? And I think a large part of it is that people's beliefs they feel our self-expression, tribal loyalty, coalitional solidarity, and the idea that, as Bertrand Russell put it, it is undesirable to believe a proposition when there are no grounds whatsoever for supposing it is true. That may sound banal and obvious. It's actually a weird, radical, unnatural way of thinking of things. People in journalism, people in science, people in history and government record keeping, it's become second nature that you try to determine what objective truth is. That's not the way an ordinary human thinks.
And has that got more pronounced because we've become more tribal, because we coalesce more on social media, where belief is more powerful than truth?
I think it is because of the fragmentation of common knowledge into pools within which you have common knowledge, but less so across nationwide.
So more tribal knowledge.
More tribal. It used to be when when there was a dominance of nationwide media, say the BBC in the UK, and in the United States there were 3 networks, television networks, and magazines that everyone would read, like Time magazine or Newsweek, a small number of them. They had, since they were limited distribution of information, just because the technology was, I guess you could say, primitive in that era, it meant that those who were controlling them felt some kind of fiduciary responsibility to present a truth that everyone could accept, rather than capitalizing on an audience to deliver the kind of myth that they enjoy hearing. You couldn't get away with that if you had to appeal to the entire population.
Unless you believe, as some of the people watching this on YouTube, some of them who will be on the more conspiratorial side of the ball, you would imagine, say that's exactly what leads to problems, because you end up with consensus and common knowledge, which becomes orthodoxy, dangerous liberal consensus, gets you into a mess on all sorts of issues, whether it's war and peace, whether it's health, whether it's migration and immigration and race and racism. There's a whole bunch of common knowledge becomes ossified into a consensus that they feel is actually dangerous to allow to subsist.
Well, and there's a good argument in there. That is, you don't want a monopoly on information like Pravda in the Soviet Union, where what you have is common misconception, sometimes enforced by a monopoly. So the ideal would be institutions that don't monopolize the source of information, but have some stated commitment to try to get at the truth by standards that everyone could share.
Yeah.
And there are sources.
And are we losing that? Are we losing that? Is that one of the things you're charting, really, the dissolution of that?
Yes, I think it's always fragile, and even the best institutions have always been imperfect, as you noted. A media monopoly like the BBC can impose what seems like just the truth, but subsequent skepticism shows to be not so true. Scientific community sometimes can get locked onto beliefs that are later shown to be false. So that's why it's always absolutely indispensable to have free speech. That speech can't be punished, it can't be censored, even if it's obviously wrong by the standards of the day, because none of us is omniscient, none of us is infallible. What everyone assumes has to be wrong every now and again turns out to be right, and the only way we find out that it's right is someone voices it.
I want to get to free speech in a moment, but before that, is there a danger of common knowledge becomes virtue signaling, where you don't necessarily believe something, but in order to be part of the gang, in order to be part of what feels like the consensus, you either lie about what you really feel or you suppress what you really feel? Is that a danger that we
Oh, absolutely. It even has a name. It's sometimes called pluralistic ignorance, or a spiral of silence. And related to the framework of common knowledge in the book, it's a case where there is private knowledge and common misconception. So everyone might think that everyone else thinks something, and no one might actually think it.
Yeah.
And that can happen if you're punished for expressing beliefs. It's common in autocracies where everyone hates the regime, but everyone worries that they're the only one. And so one of the reasons that they can't oppose the regime is one person standing up can get picked off by the authorities, but you can't get everyone standing up at once because everyone is afraid they'll be the only one. That's why public protests often can galvanize opposition. In a public protest, you can see other people, and other people can see other people, and that signals that opposition to the regime is widespread. So that can overthrow a regime, because as the Gandhi character in the Gandhi movie says, to a British colonial officer, 100,000 Englishmen cannot control 350 million Indians if the Indians refuse to cooperate. And he could have said coordinate.
Yeah.
And that's why the key in protests is generating common knowledge. It's not enough for everyone to hate the regime. Everyone has to know that everyone else hates it. That's why autocratic regimes repress speech, free speech. You might think, gee, well, what do they care what people say? Let people bitch and moan all they want. They've got the guns. But they are terrified for the reasons that Gandhi explained, and they try to repress common knowledge. My favorite example is a joke from the old Soviet Union, where a man's handing out leaflets in Red Square. Of course, the KGB arrest him, take him back to headquarters, only to discover that the leaflets are blank sheets of paper. And they confront him, what's the meaning of this? And he says, what's there to say? It's so obvious. The point of the joke being, he was being subversive. He wasn't disseminating information. He was disseminating common knowledge. The fact that people accepting the leaflets, knowing why he was distributing them, was enough for them to know that they weren't.
And made
the
him
only
dangerous.
ones. And they made him dangerous, which is why Putin's police will arrest someone for carrying a blank sign.
Yeah, that's amazing. In the world of the great gender disputes that have characterised the last 5 years, I wonder, have we seen a bit of that, where you get to the position where many people want to believe there's two sexes, two biological sexes, male and female. And there's a group of people, a relatively small group of people, who have gender issues and are more fluid in terms of how they regard their gender. But that doesn't necessarily alter the biological fact of two sexes. But the fear of being laudably discourteous to people who might have a different belief system, or, which is slightly less laudable, the fear of being on the wrong side of history, the fear of being seen as a bigot, made a whole bunch of people, including politicians, unable to say simple things like there are two biological sexes.
Let alone the fear of being physically assaulted.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, I suspect, I don't know of any polling results, but I suspect that there'd be a lot of pluralistic ignorance in that. I think a lot of people interviewed privately would say, well, yeah, of course there are two sexes. But what does everyone else think? Well, this is just my view. Everyone else thinks that sex is on a continuum.
Yeah.
And I suspect that there are many more people who think that other people believe it than who actually believe it.
So how did that happen then? Because I'm interested in that, because that's the phenomenon of common knowledge there being negative, where people have a certain view, but they feel they can't express that view because, the trendy consensus, the powerful consensus?
They're punished in one way or another. Sometimes they're literally punished. You can get it's a firing offense to say there are two sexes. Sometimes it's a social punishment. You get called a bigot. People will refuse to talk to you. So whenever there's punishment for expressing an idea, you can get the spiral of silence. The spiral referring to the fact that that if one person is inhibited, then it leads to other people thinking all the more you can't say that. No one is saying that. That shows that you can't say that. And the fact that no one says it reinforces the norm. You can't say that. That's the spiral.
Yeah, and therefore you definitely won't say it.
And then you definitely won't say it.
And the next person won't say it. And is that cancel culture in your view?
Yes, that's the main mechanism.
There's two forms of cancel culture, isn't there? There's the overt cancel culture, which is, I'm more powerful than you, I'm shutting you up. That's the authoritarian one. But the more subversive one is the one you're talking about there, I think, which is the cancel culture, which is the world is unforgiving of me having this perspective, so I won't risk it.
Yes, that's right. And it can be in a professional context, in a social context. We are social animals. If we're ostracized, if we're excommunicated, if we're demonized, it is a kind of social death. So it's not as bad as being thrown in jail or being shot, but it can be devastating. And in many cases, such as my colleague Carol Hooven, a former student who wrote a book. She's a biologist, was at Harvard University, wrote a book on testosterone, talked about it on a Fox News program, said according to biologists there are only two sexes determined by the difference between eggs and sperm. She became public enemy number one at Harvard. She wasn't literally fired, but she just couldn't do her job. She couldn't get graduate students to be teaching assistants in her course. No one would talk to her. And she basically was forced to leave unofficially by the second kind of cancel culture, even though no one actually handed her papers and said, you're fired.
And has that pendulum swung back, do you think? Because that was when, if you want to talk about in terms of left or right, I suppose you can progressive or conservative. There was a moment in history where the progressives were in power and a progressive line of thought on things like gender was the orthodoxy. I wonder if that's the opposite position is now. Is
well, in the last, there are many ironies, including the fact that in the last 3 weeks, there's a rise of cancel culture on the right in the wake of the shooting of Charlie Kirk. If you dissent from the idea that he was a kind of saint of civil discourse, if you say anything negative about him, in many cases, people have been fired. People have been mobbed on social media. They've been subject to death threats. And so the same kind of dynamic. It isn't that the government literally makes it illegal, although in fact many officials of the Trump administration have vowed to go after what they think of as
what do you make of Trump's behaviour in that way? Do you think Trump is a threat to free speech in this area?
Oh, unquestionably. In particular, being a professor at Harvard University, where he has tried to figure out every legal means that he can to punish the university.
And Harvard's just settled $500 million with him, it looks like.
Well, they're in negotiations, and they might. I don't think they've decided to do that. But
other universities haven't. I saw a report that Harvard are thinking about $500 million. It's certainly
thinking about it, yes.
There's clearly so how does that work? So, from someone in this country, I can't understand this. The president thinks Harvard has behaved badly towards Jewish students and is threatening to has withdrawn federal funding. And therefore, Harvard has to settle with the president in order to get the federal funding pushed through again, even though a court might say he's not entitled to take the federal funding away. And there could be a settlement. Now, is that a messy approach towards happy collaborative living, or is it a chilling example of you're not allowed to have a certain perspective as an institution, you're not allowed to have this version of common knowledge, I'm coming after you and you're just going to have to cower to me at some level at some stage?
I would say it's the latter. Namely, if in a dark alley you're threatened with a mugger who's pointing a gun and saying your money or your life, now's not the time to be a hero. You may have no choice. It's not a desirable state of affairs, but stuck in that situation, it's the rational thing to do.
And is that what universities are like in America now, do you think?
Yes. I mean, I think I hope, being a professor at Harvard and being the co-founder and president of the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, that there are certain red lines that Harvard will not cross, such as giving the federal government a role in hiring, in admissions, in what people on campus can say. There may be some cases where we have to hold our nose, swallow hard, and decide that it's our life, not our money, simply because the threats from the Trump administration could destroy Harvard as we know it, namely as a center for world-class research in biomedicine, in physics, in engineering, in the humanities. And so some compromises might be worth making as a grim concession to reality. Others, I think Harvard must draw the line.
But this is thuggery, really.
Oh, it's absolute thuggery, no question. Because the anti-Semitism is a pretext. I say this as a Jewish professor at Harvard, concerned about anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And there was clearly an issue of free speech, where again the orthodoxy around the behaviour of Israel, and look, the behaviour of Israel is subject to very legitimate criticism from people of all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds. But there was a consensus that there was suspicion, it felt like, in American campuses towards Jewish people because of the behaviour of Israel.
Well, and I don't think I think the Trump administration doesn't particularly care about anti-Semitism one way or another. For one thing, shutting down biomedical research, including no shortage of Jewish students, Jewish professors, and saying we're doing it to protect Jewish interests. That's not so good for the Jews. No. And most Jewish scientists and students are appalled at what the Trump administration is doing, ostensibly in their name. And in some of their ultimata, they forgot that anti-Semitism was supposedly their pretext. They don't even mention anti-Semitism. So that's a red herring. I think it's a red herring.
This is just autocracy.
This is on the way to autocracy. Yeah.
And is there a not liberal with a capital L? Is there a approach to it that will resist that? This is a book about common knowledge, where, again, when I come back to my good faith point, at the best of it, that's pointing towards a set of values and a set of parameters and a set of, even if you don't agree with every detail, an acceptable parameter within which society functions. That's presumably common knowledge at its best.
It ought to be,
but it isn't.
But it isn't. No, I think liberal democracy, institutions like markets, free speech, reliance on science, universal human rights, government with the consent of the governed, constrained by the rule of law. All of these are deeply weird ideas in human history. They're not cognitively natural at all. What's cognitively natural is the tribe has to stick together. It has a strong leader. The leader owns the tribe, controls the tribe.
The Hobbesian view of the powerful prospers.
The powerful prosper. We want a strong leader because the tribe across the river, they have their strong leader, and we got to protect ourselves against them. That beliefs are expressions of what kind of person you are. Are you loyal to the tribe or not? So the idea that no, beliefs should be determined by science and power should be allocated by the rule of law, all these things, excellent things that are demonstrably the best way to have a society, but people naturally backslide from them.
So what's the answer then? Are we reverting to this, in some ways, this postmodern world, or even post-postmodern world we're in, actually could be a reversion to times where it's a little bit more tribal, a little bit more brutal, a little bit more autocratic?
Well, we know just from organizations that track democracy worldwide, they just give countries scores based on, do they repress journalists? Do people have the right to are the elections fair? Do people have the right to express their opinions? And they grade countries. There has been some backtracking in the Global Democracy Index. The world is less democratic now than it was 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. Way more democratic, though, than it was any time in the 20th century.
Obviously before that.
Let alone before that, yes. So the overall trajectory is the world has gotten more democratic, but we have done some backsliding in the last couple of decades.
Because you're one of academia's great optimists. I mean, maybe we're oversimplifying your book, but I always took great heart from the fact that you did a book which showed the world is getting less violent, the world is manifestly getting more prosperous. Whether that will carry on, there certainly has been, capitalism has led to great prosperity for everyone. Are you no longer an optimist, Steven Pinker?
Well, the thing is, I never claimed to be an optimist so much as I urged that we understand the world through data and trends rather than through headlines and incidents.
Yeah.
Because and that's basically what news is. It's everything that's gone wrong in the last 24 hours, or now the last 24 seconds, probably.
Good news is no news.
Good news is no news. No news is good news. Or often good news is things that creep up a few percentage points a year and compound, but don't suddenly explode on a Thursday morning. Such as the fact that global poverty has gone from extreme poverty has gone from about 90% of humanity to about 9%. That was never a headline.
No.
Or that when a country is not attacked by terrorists, when it's no longer at war, there's just no headline. So it's only when you count and you realize, oh my goodness, there are wars going on, but there were many more wars in the second half of the 20th century.
So are you still? So I mean, you're not. So it's not optimism. It's just data-driven, evidence-led commentary. But
yes, thank you.
But within that, does the data make you more? Are you backsliding, Steven Pinker? Are you less confident than you were 10 years ago?
In some ways. So democracy absolutely has been going in the wrong direction. War deaths have gone in the wrong direction because of everyone knows about Gaza, and that has contributed, but also Ukraine, Sudan, also Ethiopia, which actually had far more war deaths. So that's a bit of backtracking. Again, we're still better off than we were in the 20th century, but we're worse off than we were, say, 20 years ago.
Are we stupider?
Well, in some ways, a little bit. That is that for a century, there was we were getting smarter. There was an effect called the Flynn effect, that IQ scores were rising about 3 points a decade for about a century. Now, in the countries that have seen the greatest increase, there is some backsliding, and the Flynn effect is going in reverse. Again, it hasn't wiped out the advances, but it's gone in the wrong direction.
So we could have peaked as a civilization.
Well, it's possible. This is what we don't know. Did we peak, or is it a blip? And we just don't know, because I don't believe that history is cyclical. I don't believe that you just be patient, wait, and we'll go back to the way we were some number of years ago. I don't think history works that way. There's an awful lot of randomness. Stuff comes out of the blue. It hits you. You don't expect it. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. No one expects a lot of things. And the thing is, you can't know at the time whether this is a temporary setback or a new normal.
But at the very least, it's a setback.
But there have been setbacks. At the same time, though, I have to emphasize that other positive trends have continued. Poverty continues to decline. Life expectancy continues to increase after a dip during the pandemic, of course. More people go to school, more girls go to school, more people have access to electricity, more people have access to clean water, clean air. So the world is making progress on a lot of things that really matter, like living, like not being in poverty. And those are continuing to improve.
Stephen, the reason we love talking to you is that you're not going to just give us one headline, because that's not how the world works, and that's why we wanted to speak to you. The book is so good. Your thinking is so clear. When everyone knows that everyone knows, it's such a clever idea for a book, I think. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this week. Well, I think I probably covered a pretty large area. I know you want to give your comments beneath the line. Be as courteous as you possibly can. We're going to come back more in this second season of Thinkers with more big ideas, trying to tackle the world around us with a bit of nuance and a bit of thoughtfulness. Thank you so much for joining us.